Hi, my name is Kyra Smith, and this is my applied assignment for the semester. For this assignment, I chose to talk about people with invisible disabilities and how they struggle in work environments. I chose to talk to a friend who has an invisible disability, and I learned a lot about the process of getting hired with an invisible disability and how it feels to be a part of that community. Because of this, I really want to look into how to make classrooms more inclusive because I plan on being a kindergarten teacher in the future. I have friends and family with invisible disabilities, so I wanted to learn more about why they don't job hunt as often, especially since I feel like they tend to stay in jobs that aren't necessarily helpful for them or are good environments for them. I asked my friend Michaela, who I met through my boyfriend, to talk to me about her invisible disability. We talked about whether or not she would consider herself to be disabled, how often she mentions her disability in interviews, what it's like hunting for jobs as someone with a disability, and what her diagnosis is and how it affects her every day. Before the interview, I knew a little bit about invisible disabilities, and I knew that there are a lot of types, both mental and physical, and that it can make it difficult for people to do them with everyday tasks. But most importantly, invisible disabilities are just that. They're invisible from the outside. For our course materials that I looked at, I feel like my first introduction really to the term invisible disability was the article by NPR that we looked at the first week. It really made me think about how many of my friends and family would be people who would be considered to have invisible disabilities. Resource 2, I really looked at race identity and stereotyping and voluntary oppression. I felt like it was a really good way to kind of bring to light stereotyping and stigma, and also be able to kind of compare it to those with disabilities and invisible disabilities. And then why employers don't hire people with disabilities really made me narrow in on my interviewee, because my friend Michaela is having such a hard time finding a job right now. So I thought she would really be a good person to talk to about this topic. Right here, I have my interview notes listed, as well as a quote that really helped me kind of form my questions for her. Mostly the notes are about why she doesn't talk to people about it, how much she brings it up in interviews, whether or not she considers herself to be disabled, and how it affects her and if it affects her every day. What I learned was from my friend Michaela was that in order to avoid violating the ADA guidelines, she is often told that she is not qualified for jobs, even though, according to her resume and job requirements, she is very overqualified. And so she was telling me how much that hurts her and how much it's hard for her because employers won't offer her a job, and she often won't mention her disability until after she gets a job offer. And even then they'll take it back just because they're like, oh, well, we found someone who fits better. Because she feels like if she mentions it first, she's going to be told she's not qualified, even though she knows that that's not the truth. I also learned that there is a lot of stigma around disability, and my friend Michaela feels like she really has to prove her disability to people. In her last job, she felt like she was having to bring in notes every other day or every day just to prove that she was in fact having issues and a huge disability. Michaela has arthritis in all of her hands, so she can't do any lifting or anything that was heavy, and she felt like she was constantly having to prove that she had this issue that was making it almost impossible for her to do everyday tasks. It made me think about those implicit bias tests that we were taking, and how when we looked at, especially the disabled one, there was, someone who looked like quote unquote able-bodied and normal, and there was someone who was in a wheelchair, and how that might affect people's perception of disability, because you think you're getting someone who is that able-bodied normal person, again, very quote unquote here. And then they tell you that they have a disability and how that might conflict mentally for you. And then the last thing that really struck me was how reluctant my friend was to call herself disabled, even though she has all these issues that make it physically impossible for her to move. And she's finding out about new ones every day. She's finding out about heart problems that she's having now and things that are going to make it near impossible for her to work. But she just kept talking about, how she felt like she couldn't really identify as disabled because she's constantly in flare-ups and remission, even though it hurts her to do things every day, and that just because she looks physically all right, she feels like she shouldn't necessarily have claim to that. And I feel like part of that is because how disabilities are represented, in media and in context. A lot of people with invisible disabilities don't talk about it and they don't come forward about it. So I feel like it was really interesting to see how that stigma and those stereotypes were affecting my friend. Now I want to know, as someone who is going to become a kindergarten teacher, I want to know how I can make my room as inclusive as possible for students both that look disabled and those with invisible disabilities. And I also want to know how I can incorporate sensory safe areas into my room for students who may have sensory overloads. And I think the most important way I can do this is by research. I can look at articles and studies, but I can also look at anecdotes from other teachers and what they're doing right now. The app TikTok is a really great resource to see what teachers are doing and how they incorporate things into their room. But I also think the best way for me to learn is through time and practice and trial and error. I have a couple questions for you guys. I just want to know, how do you think you can help those with invisible disabilities in your future career? And do you think we need to write invisible disabilities their own set of laws around the workplace to prevent what's happening to my friend Michaela? Thank you guys so much for your time, and I hope you have an amazing semester.